Hey everybody, and welcome back to another severe storm thermal weather forecast. In this forecast, we have a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. As you can see here, first taking a look at our 500 millibar jet, meaning our mid-level jet. This is basically what shows our ridges and troughs across the United States. Notice that we have a big ridge that's building across portions of the central and western United States, while we have a huge dip in the jet stream in the eastern United States. And that, my friends, is because of this trough that is bringing down cooler than average air behind it. All right, and that's why we're going to continue to see that as we head in towards the daytime hours tomorrow, into Tuesday, into Wednesday. And I just wanted to point this out. Look how tall this very big heat dome is. All right, while we have this huge kind of blast of cold air, not frigid cold, but you know what I mean. You're going to feel it, especially across the northern part of these areas where we could see temperatures not getting out of the 60s for highs, which is very abnormal, especially for late August standards. We really don't see those big temp drops until September, and that's very surprising we're seeing that. But we don't stay in that pattern for long, because late this week, notice how this trough will begin to exit to the north and east, and will likely have this huge heat dome, or this ring of fire pattern that is likely going to redevelop across this area. And we're likely going to start having to watch for that concerning northwest flow over top that ridge on the northern and eastern end, meaning that would favor those severe storm complexes, those mesoscale convective systems, or even a derecho. All right, so we're going to need to monitor that closely. And the month of August is very ruly for mesoscale convective systems. Not really that much derechos, but mesoscale convective systems can still do a lot in terms of damage here. But notice as we go in towards the weekend that this ring of fire pattern begins to move eastward, and we only start to see the impacts going further eastward as well. Notice that we continue to see that northwest flow. The weekend would potentially feature some sort of mesoscale convective system across areas of the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes. That's why we need to stay at attention all the time across these areas, while we will likely have some cooler air spilling into the northeast, and we will have storm complexes interacting with those warmer and cooler air masses. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on really closely as we head in towards next weekend. And even then, as we head in towards Sunday the 25th, notice this ring of fire pattern really does not depart until we get into early next week, which I'll put that into motion in a second. But notice here that we could potentially get a really substantial negatively tilted trough by the time we head in towards that time frame, and that would only enhance the severe weather chances across portions of the Great Lakes region. And on top of that, you have that ring of fire pattern. So like I said, it's going to be a concerning and rough ride potentially for the end of August for these circled areas. And I'm not kidding when I say that. That is the pattern that favors those storm complexes, all right? So we're going to need to monitor that as we head in towards next weekend. Even into next week, too, notice that this ridge begins to move back westward. However, we still have that flow over top the ridge that would favor that. All right, and this would potentially be the time we're talking about a potential derecho, because how far west this is, and how far east the flow is away from it. All right, so that is really something we're going to need to keep an eye on as we head in towards that time frame, especially across portions of the circle region, which I have right here. All right, everybody, now let's take a look at our precipitation trends across the United States here. And as you can see, with that trough sitting over the Great Lakes region, we are seeing a lot of shower activity across portions of the Great Lakes back up and towards the northeast, while we are continuing to see Ernesto starting to plummet towards the north, toward Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and is likely going to weaken to a tropical storm, or at least a low-end hurricane by the time we go towards the daytime hours tomorrow. And that's good news that it'll be out of our way because that also means this trough is likely going to begin to depart too. But don't forget the blocking pattern in the central and eastern the central, northern, and southern United States, because that is likely going to bring down an even bigger frontal boundary of cold air across these areas. All right, so you have huge troughing on the eastern half of the United States, while you have a huge blocking pattern on the central United States. So that is pretty significant in my opinion here, and we're still continuing to see rain across portions of the Northeast, and some of that could be heavy at times, especially across the Northeast. But as we go in towards the daytime hours on Tuesday, notice that this ridge begins to build across the west, and we're still seeing the trough across portions of the east coast of the United States. Very cooler air than what you normally see this time of year because of that trough. And notice all the moisture is still focused on the northeastern United States, and we're also starting to see an area of Canadian high pressure build, and we'll likely continue to see cooler air building in on the eastern end of that high pressure system. And then finally, by the time we go into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, that high pressure system will move east, and we'll likely begin to start seeing some warm up across portions of the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes, and that's when we start to see that ring of fire pattern starting to regime again, as that high pressure system starts to dominate with the northwest flow over top of that. That's exactly what's showing here on the European model. This is all in Canada, but this would potentially bring itself into portions of northwest PA by the time we go towards that time frame. Again, where these things develop is highly uncertain. However, this pattern definitely really favors it. So we're going to need to, not all, but keep an eye on it. So we're going to need to do that. But notice as we go in towards the weekend that we're pretty dry across much of the United States. However, like I said, this pattern still favors that potential. Just because you don't see those complexes right now doesn't mean they won't show on future trends. All right, we really need to be monitoring future trends, and they are starting to show as we head in towards next week. Notice a complex over here in northeast Ohio, western PA. That would be concerning. And then as we head in towards Wednesday, the 28th, things are very uncertain, like I said before, but it looks like those storm complexes will really start to race down the ridge, with potentially some sort of frontal boundary coming down across portions of the southern and central United States as we head in towards that time frame. All right, everybody, now we're taking a look at the short term here, and as you can see, that Storm Prediction Center has put out a level 2 out of 5 for severe weather for portions of Kansas back down into the Gulf Coast, up back into the eastern United States. And we also have a marginal risk surrounding that, as well as a broad marginal risk over here in the west coast of the United States. And all of these areas will likely be mainly damaging winds and hail. However, an isolated tornado cannot be ruled out, especially along the eastern United States, where we could potentially see some sort of line of storms develop later on. So without further ado, let's time out the main area of concern today. Notice as we go in towards 3 and 4 p.m. that we start to see that line start to form across portions of central PA back up into southern New York. And we also see some isolated pop-ups that could go strong to severe across portions of central North Carolina. And as you can see, this batch of rain could potentially make things conditional for the northern part of that marginal risk up there into portions of southern Nebraska. That is very conditional. And then as we go in towards this evening, notice how a broken line of storms extends all the way from Arkansas all the way up to the eastern half of the United States. And then you can see here that there's a little breaking area, so maybe those are two separate broken lines of storms, but still, these would still have the potential for embedded spin-up tornadoes. So we're going to need to keep an eye on that closely as we head in towards the evening and overnight hours. And then if things clear out in time, we would see a potential severe threat over here across portions of Kansas, but that just doesn't look to happen. So maybe just a marginal severe weather threat pretty much over there in the Central Plains for the day today, while we have the main area of concern for the slight risk, while we have the clearing over here in the eastern half of the United States, where things could potentially get active later today. The last thing we're going to be taking a look at is our tropical outlook, potentially long-term here. As you can see, that the Climate Prediction Center has some sort of concern that we could potentially see a tropical wave move off Western Africa before the end of the month. However, the European model is definitely not showing that. However, it's very much possible. It becomes very much more concerning as we head into early September, though, as the Climate Prediction Center has put a 60+% chance of some sort of tropical development across portions of the Atlantic getting into the Gulf Coast of the United States. So we're going to need to have to watch that, and it definitely, all signs are pointing to a very active hurricane season into the month of September. All right, folks, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your weekend.